All right. We are now recording, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us virtually tonight. I hope everyone's having a good evening as we're getting started here. So my name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am thrilled to introduce you to today's sort of fantasy genre extravaganza event with Ekta R. Garg reading from The Truth About Elves, which released October 19th, Pasquale di Falco reading from Duskborn Radiance, A Mother's Question, which released October 28th, and Laurel Schmidt reading from How to Be Dead, A Love Story, which released November 1st. All three authors' books can be purchased both through your local bookstores and, of course, online. And the books can be ordered at Atmosphere Press's website at atmospherepress.com/books. Please see the links in the chat. At the end of the event, we will have time for your questions. So throughout the event, if you have any kind of questions for our authors, go ahead and type them in the chat, and we'll, of course, make sure they get asked. During the reading, please keep yourselves muted to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. In the meantime, though, do feel free to use the chat for praise and comments and anything you'd like to say during the reading. As you may have experienced over the last year of virtual events, technical issues, of course, can happen. And if they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. So thank you in advance for your patience. And one last note, we here at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. And if you have a manuscript of your own, we'd love to read it. So feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in tonight and supporting Ekta, Pasquale, and Laurel. Let's get to it. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first reader, Ekta R. Garg. Ekta is a freelance editor and a short story judge for both the Florida Writers Association and Saturday Writers, the St. Louis-based chapter of the Missouri Writers Guild. She hosts Biblio Breakdown, the writing podcast from the Writescast Network that now airs on her own author website, and she reviews books for her book review blog, The Right Edge Bookshelf, as well as NetGalley and Book Pleasures. She lives in central Illinois with her husband and family. The Truth About Elves is her first book. Ekta, take it away.
Thank you so much, Hala. I want to thank everyone who's here tonight, and a big thank you to Atmosphere Press for helping me make this dream come true. It's something that I wanted since I was 14, and it's been an amazing journey, and Cam and Claire and Hala have done an amazing job helping me through this. So I'm thrilled that I can be here tonight to share the opening chapter of my debut novella, The Truth About Elves. December 17, 2005, day of the accident, the Arctic Circle. Prerna rubbed her hands together as she hurried down the long hallway outside Mr. C's office. Glad to be out of the cold, she brushed a few snowflakes from her shoulders, then unlocked the door to the waiting room and went inside. She flicked on the lights and moved to the desk to turn on the computer, then docked her iPod in the office music system. As she waited for the electronics to start processing, she hung up her jacket and scarves. Neither machine responded right away, but she didn't worry too much. When the temperatures dropped below zero, like they did at this time of year, the electronics always needed a few extra minutes to wake up. They're not the only things that need help waking up, she thought, as she stifled a yawn with her hand. Why couldn't Mr. C be working at a someplace warm like South America? As she turned on the fancy coffee machine to make herself a cappuccino, she glanced around to make sure all was in order. A few magazines sat on the low coffee table in the middle of the room. Two end tables on either side of comfortable chairs held 4 books each. The elves knew they were welcome to borrow the books as long as they returned them by the end of their quarter course shift. The coffee machine sputtered to life, and Prerna exhaled with it. Within minutes, she held a steaming cup in her hands. She went behind the desk and slid the mouse back and forth across the pad, bringing up her to-do list. The waiting room door opened and an elf poked his head around it. Rare and I gave him a little wave and blew on her coffee. Morning, Jonathan. I'm glad you're here, he said. He disappeared for a second, only to enter the waiting room moments later, pulling a dolly. Mail call. Prerna suppressed a sigh as she pushed back a few of the long black curls that managed to escape her headband. The elf pulled the dolly closer and stood it upright just to the side of the desk. Is Mr. C in? Prerna shook her head and turned to the calendar on her computer screen. She clicked a few windows until Mr. C's agenda for the day appeared, took a sip of her coffee, then put it down on the desk. He's in the stables. One of the reindeer had a calf last night, or was supposed to anyway. Jonathan tipped the dolly forward so the oversized bag he'd carried in slid off and pulled a clipboard off the back. I guess that means you signed for this then, he said. Prerna scribbled on the clipboard and turned to face the bag. This time she couldn't stop herself from sighing, although she knew she had an easy job. No matter how late he had to stay up to do it, Mr. C would read every single letter addressed to him. How's the coffee from that newfangled thing? Jonathan asked, eyeing the steaming mug close to her. Really good, she said. Mr. C's thinking about ordering more machines after the holiday rush so the elves can use them. Jonathan's eyes lit up. A coffee connoisseur, Prerna knew. Rumor had it Jonathan had even worked in the trade somehow, although no one had any more details than that. She wouldn't ask, of course, and no one else would either. Jonathan had only started working at the Arctic Circle a year earlier, and she still remembered the bruises that accompanied his surly disposition when he arrived. He'd fought most of his internal demons, and no one wanted to undo the progress he'd made. All right, well, tell Mr. C I said hello, he said. He gave her a little two-fingered salute and grinned. See you at lunch later? She nodded. Save me a seat? You got it. He pulled the dolly back through the door, and Prerna dropped to one knee to start pulling the mail out of the bag. Even though it would create more of a mess than she liked, she started sorting the mail right there on the floor. The letters, covered in childish drawings and stickers addressed to Santa Claus, she put in one pile. The ones that had typed return addresses or asked to be delivered to S. Claus went into another. With the children's letters in one hand and all the grown-up mail in the other, Prerna got up and went to the solid wood door to her right, the entrance to Mr. C's office. Even now, more than 2 years after starting at the circle herself, she still had trouble believing she worked for one of the busiest men in the world. She used her shoulder to push the door open and her elbow to hit the switch on the wall. As the boss liked, she left the letters in 2 neat stacks on either side of his computer keyboard. She glanced around the room to see if she needed to tidy anything, and just then she heard the click of the outer door opening. Prerna? Rounding the desk, Prerna went to meet the man himself. Good morning, Mr. C, she said. How's our new baby reindeer? Mr. C unwound the lengthy scarf from his neck and ran a hand over his white beard several times. Just fine. Beautiful and healthy. The mama's doing well, too. Prerna's smile widened. Good. I put your mail on your desk, and I'm about to scan the headlines for the day. Do you need anything? Music, Mr. C said, holding up one finger and then 2, and hot chocolate. Prerna nodded. Coming right up, in that order. She went back to her desk and spun the wheel on the iPod. Within minutes, the first track from a classical album with holiday music floated through the air. Prerna went to the coffee machine next and inserted a pod for hot chocolate. She pressed the wrong button once or twice, and the machine protested with indignant beats, but finally began to percolate. She returned to her computer and pulled up a few of her favorite newspapers. When she wasn't working her quarter-force shifts for Mr. C, Prerna lived in Florida. Reading the Orlando papers always made her feel closer to home when she had to come to the circle for her 3 months here. The coffee machine sputtered to a stop, drawing her attention away from the screen. Prerna grabbed a small serving tray from a bottom desk drawer and arranged the hot chocolate and a candy cane on it, then carried it into Mr. C's office. Just before pushing in the door, she gripped the tray with one hand and knocked twice with the other. "Min!" This time, she backed into the door as she took the tray to Mr. C. His eyes twinkled with childish excitement, but then dimmed a little. "No whipped cream?" he asked as he took the tray from her. Prerna put her hands on her hips. "You know Mrs. C wants you to watch what you eat, especially at this time of year. It's hard enough with all the cookies and pies that come through here every day." Mr. C scrunched his nose in disagreement. "Well, she's not the boss." "Maybe not. Erna said, but she does want you to be the boss for a lot longer. The jolly man grumbled, but his good humor came back as he took his first sips of the hot chocolate. Once again, his eyes lit up. Hey, that's really good. Let's get in touch with the manufacturer on the 26th and put in that order for about 100 more machines. You got it, Mr. C. Verna picked up the tray and went back to her desk. She started scrolling through the news again when the door to the waiting room opened. 2 elves, both of them women, came in. One looked absolutely terrified, and Verna's heart went to her. Can I help you? The terrified elf managed to stammer out that she had an appointment with Mr. C first thing. The other elf, more at ease, said the same. Verna directed both of them to sit down and went back to Mr. C's office. Poking her head through the door, she let him know his first appointments of the day had arrived, then went back to her computer and clicked check marks by the elves' names on her list. As the day progressed, Verna kept clicking check marks next to the names of the elves who came in and out. In between appointments, she tracked the last shipments of packing material that would hold the gifts tight to one another when Mr. C flew on the night of. She flicked back and forth on her computer between the shipments, the news, celebrity happenings, the weather patterns in various countries, and equipment maintenance. Lunch came and went in what felt like a blink. Verna knew final quarter always flew by, but today seemed exceptionally fast. In the late afternoon, Mrs. C stopped in to say hello. She greeted the last elf to leave the waiting room with a smile and insisted that he take several cookies from the plate she held. After a few minutes of small talk, the elf left and Mrs. C came to Verna's desk. Mrs. C, Verna said through a groan, I can't get the boss to stay on a diet if you keep bringing these by. Oh, hush now, the elderly woman said, her eyes sparkling over her small round glasses. This isn't for Mr. C. I brought these for you to sample. The rest are going in batches to all the cabins tonight. I know how the elves need a little motivation in this last week before the night of. Verna bit into the perfect blend of flour, butter, sugar, and chocolate. She sighed with contentment around her chewing and nodded her approval. Good? Mrs. C asked. Good, Verna said with her mouth full. Everyone's going to love these. A banner in bright red on her screen flashed twice. Verna turned her attention to the news site and forgot about the cookie. Her hand lowered to the desk and she leaned toward the screen as she read the headline. Breaking news. Plane executes emergency landing on Utah highway full of cars. Details to come. Her mouth dropped open. What happened, dear? Mrs. C asked, coming around the desk. The woman angled down so she could read the screen through her glasses and covered her mouth with her hand. Oh, those poor souls, she murmured. I hope everyone's all right. Verna's chest got tight. She didn't know why. No one she knew lived anywhere near Utah. Her parents were in Orlando. Akash, well, Verna knew he hadn't run to the Beehive State. Still, the tightness wouldn't go away and she coughed. Mrs. C patted her on the back. Now, dear, I'm sure it'll turn out fine. Just then, Mr. C came out of his office and greeted his wife. He tried to grab a cookie, but Mrs. C batted his hand away, and a mischievous glint appeared in his eye. His smile extended to Verna, but then faded. What's the matter, Verna? She pointed at the screen, unable to form words. Her pulse drummed in her ears, and her reaction disturbed her as much as the news did. Mrs. C moved back so her husband could read the headline. His brow furrowed as he straightened up. Did you know someone there? He asked. Verna shook her head. No, but it seems like it feels important. Mr. C looked at her with consideration for a moment, then nodded. It might be, he said finally, and if it is, we'll help whoever comes to us the way we help everyone else here, by giving them purpose. Verna held his gaze for a moment, and bit by bit, her heart stopped pounding. There you go. That's the first chapter of The Truth About Elves, which is a holiday novella, and as I said, my debut, and I'm so thrilled to be able to share it with all of you tonight.
Thank you so much, Ekta. Don't get me wrong, I love Thanksgiving, but that was just really getting me into the Christmas spirit, and I'm so excited. And I think I'm so intrigued to know what happens next. But thank you again for reading for us. And our second reader tonight is Pasquale di Falco. So Pasquale's career began in law, government, and politics. Then he saw the light. After passing the Illinois bar exam, he left his native Chicago and embarked on a magical 5-year pilgrimage across the American West. He now lives with his wife and their newborn son. Pasquale, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Hala, and thank you also, Laurel and Ekta, for sharing the virtual stage tonight. This series is Duskborn Radiance. Volume 1 is A Mother's Question, and this is from Chapter 1, Amelia, Part 1. His elder brother and sister picked their way through the trees and brush a full 10 paces ahead of him while they whispered to each other, as ever. He had thought that when he was finally permitted into the advanced lessons, they would include him in their talk. That was wishful thinking, young Amadeus told himself then. Before, Mother had forbidden them from speaking with him about the subjects until he reached the right point in his studies, and he had accepted that. Now, though, his siblings had told him that he was too junior to keep up with them, and that was when he had cried foul. For all the good it had done him, Amadeus still stared at the backs of their heads and struggled to keep up. He wondered if the question that he meant to ask during their lessons that evening would change anything. Their route was familiar, and their destination was not far from their village. Every morning, after they had tidied their beds, scarfed down a quick meal, and finished their early chores, they would head first a mile west, across gentle terrain with its gold and amber fields, and then into the forest. They would cross the tree line as the sun rose. Their day was easy until they entered the woods. From there, they faced narrow footpaths in the grass and dirt, roots thicker than a grown man's thigh, and slippery moss the same green as his mother's eyes. The path to their destination was taxing, though not nearly as taxing as what awaited them. Brethren heroes, knights, and captains for 100 miles and more journeyed to train at arms with Master Varric. Some did so regularly, and some did so only once. In their little corner of the world, to be able to count him as a friend and mentor was considered a great honor. Amadeus's family was lucky. Master Varric had owed Mother some debt, so he agreed to train her children at arms. She had called it the most rudimentary part of your education, though a necessary one. Each of them had begun their martial training at the age of 7, which meant that Dominic had had a full year to himself before Katerina had joined him. For 6 years now, Amadeus had trekked to the master's clearing near first thing in the morning, 5 days of every 7, with Bogro following behind. And early and snaggly though the way there was, the way back was always worse, as the three never walked away without new cuts, bruises, or blisters, to say nothing of the aching muscles. Still, the forest was beautiful, and Amadeus had long ago learned to treasure this fact. Its scent was the freshest he knew, all live wood, rich soil, ripe flower, and crisp water. Birds chirped sweetly or cawed proudly from unseen fastnesses. Oaks were the most prevalent to the eye, and they were especial in early autumn. The wilderness was a masterpiece in every shade of green and brown, with scattered clusters of red, orange, or yellow leaves, and a steady sprinkle of blue and white petals. Silvery morning dew bathed the plant life, and where the early sun stretched through the branches, gold reigned. Else there was shadow, light gray to dark, with the trees all melded into one. Fungus connects them beneath the surface, and their silhouettes connect them above it, Amadeus had remarked to himself more than once. He had had enough. All right, you wait now, he called ahead. He was almost out of breath, yet as Amadeus put one foot in front of the next, all he felt was his resolve. His sister Katerina stopped, though she did not turn around. She shook out her long and shaggy mane, golden blonde waves that dimmed to dark sand at the ends, never once cut in all her 15 years. Then she put her hands on her hips, a clear sign of impatience. Meanwhile, Amadeus's brother Dominic had merely slowed his pace, looking every bit the warrior in his chainmail shirt. Though Amadeus thought that it was stupid and showy overall, he had to admit that his brother had a fair reason. Dominic wanted the Iron's weight to become a part of him. Amadeus hastened to catch up. He wasn't nearly as tall as either of them. Katerina had more than 5 inches on him, all leg, and Dominic towered over them both, 6 feet tall already and broad. From behind, Amadeus heard Bogro the Bearkin's heavy footfalls. Chin up, Amadeus, Bogro said in his deep, rumbly voice, though softly enough so that Dominic and Katerina would not hear. Keep your eyes on your destination, and your feet will know what to do. Easy for you to say, Amadeus thought as he approached his sister. You're 8 feet tall and so heavy that the ground gives way for you, not to mention the claws on your feet. Yet he lifted his chin all the same. Bagro was his elder and a good friend. Though the Bearkin and the brethren shared the land of Ursadero in harmony, they lived apart. The brethren in their little villages and the Bearkin in their little dens. Thus, Amadeus's village was lucky to have Bagro. Are you ready? Katerina asked Amadeus as he reached her side. She looked him up and down with her sapphire eyes narrowed and one blonde eyebrow arched. Almost every day, she asked him that same question. Yes, Amadeus answered, and he noticed at least 3 decent-sized twigs caught in the mess that was her hair. One still had its leaves, plural. Good, she replied. Her voice was high and sweet, a gift for the ears, and it made her sound so harmless and unthreatening. Thus, it was deceptive. With that, she started down the path once more, though she kept a slower pace for Amadeus' sake. The two dressed alike, russet hard leather vests over white cloth tunics with doeskin breeches, warm cloaks, and good boots. Katerina smelled of the morning's fire, as building it was one of her chores for the week. Amadeus caught whiffs of char and smoke. Dominic's fires were best, and Amadeus's were worse, though they never once teased him for it. They soon caught up to their brother, who fell into stride with them and put Amadeus in the middle. You ready? Dominic asked, without ever actually looking down at Amadeus. Dominic had a man's deep voice, and his sharp gray eyes looked only forward. Though he wore a blank expression, this hid his mental preparation for what awaited them. And he asked that question almost every day, too. Yes, Amadeus answered. He blinked and stretched as a streak of sunlight untouched by the trees warmed his face and neck. Then he noticed that the morning dew was gone. You never actually see it disappear, he thought. 1 second you look and it's there, the next you look and it's not. For a little while, the only sounds were the sundry birds' cheerful songs, the quick stream's steady trickles, and their little band's gentle clatter as 3 brethren and 1 bearkin journey through the woods. Bagro, Dominic said with a hint of mischief. He turned over his head over his shoulder to look the bearkin in the eyes, and he never broke his stride. Yes, Dominic, Bagro asked. What do you think the most important part of our training with Master Varric is? Dominic's tone was always so confident, even when he asked questions, which was important to do. Their mother and aunts had taught them as much. What do you think the most important part is? Bagro said. Drills, Dominic replied. Archery, Katerina countered. You only say that because you're better than me with a bow. Could say the same about you and drills. What are you going to do if there's a grown man in your face, swinging an axe at your head, and all you have in your hands is a bow? Same as you with your sword and shield. Drop everything and run. Enough now, young ones. Bagro cut across them before huffing Dominic could snap back at Katerina. Amadeus, he continued. Answer the question. Amadeus was a little nervous by that. He did not want to answer wrong and look foolish in front of Bagro. Still, his mother hadn't raised him to lie. The talks. Interesting, Katerina replied. Indeed, Dominic agreed. Well, there you have it, Bagro said with a significant note. The talks then? Dominic asked, and he looked over his shoulder once more. No, stupid, Katerina said. He's saying that the answer is different for each of us. And? Bagro asked. And that the question itself has all possible answers, Amadeus finished, and he surprised himself in the bargain. He did not know where the words had come from, yet he knew that they were true. Well said, lad. But, Amadeus continued his thoughts, if a question has every possible answer, are they truly answers? The whole point of an answer is to have one. That is a good question, Bagro replied. Think about it for a time. We will try to answer it soon. He said that a lot, and he always remembered to revisit each matter, though they only ever answered with more and more questions, ended with more and more questions, truly. I can see why the talks are your favorite, Dominic said. Then he shoved Amadeus' shoulder, though not hard enough to make him miss a step. Could say the same about you and drills. Katerina was matter of fact. She shoved Dominic hard enough so that he did miss a step. Do you feel it? Bagro interjected abruptly with the same question that he had asked so very many times before. Once on every trip to Master Varric's cottage and once on every trip back from it. No, Bagro, Katerina called in jest, and she mocked disappointment. We didn't feel it, she continued, and Dominic chuckled. Maybe you will next time, Bagro replied, the same reply that he had given so very many times before. Amadeus was past inquiring further. Every time he had, Bogro had only told him that he would know it if he felt it. Still, the question was a welcome one, as it meant that they neared the master's cottage. Follow me now, young ones, Bogro ordered at the same spot as always. The three young brethren stopped and made room for the bearkin. Amadeus watched Bogro walk past and then ahead of them, him towering over their heads all the while. He was more than 300 pounds of muscle, 8 feet tall, and 4 feet across at the shoulders, with powerful arms and claws in his fists. His only garments were a pair of loose gray trousers and a dark green silk sash around his waist. Other than those and the silvery moonstone amulet around his neck, the rest of him was fur, auburn at his core, with a black face and extremities as the two colors faded into one another. Big round yellow eyes set into a head that was 2 feet wide above a snout that was 2 feet long. In the morning light, Bogro's red nose glistened no less than his white fangs did. They fell into line behind him. Amadeus was first, then Katerina, and then Dominic, who fancied himself their rear guard. The rest of the trek would be twisty and bendy, without even a footpath to be found. As much as Amadeus could gather, Bogro had led them through this last leg of their journey to Master Varric's clearing, and the first leg of their return from it along a different route every single day. The young brethren had tried to track the path for as long as they could remember, had looked for some pattern, method, or rhyme. They had found none. There was nothing for it but that the three follow Bogro, clueless. And that's where I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Pasquale. You capture that feeling of the relationship between those three so well. I love it.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. So
Cool.
rounding out our program tonight is Laurel Schmidt. Laurel is a lifelong educator, art lover, and author of 4 nonfiction books on art, learning, and brain development. She taught for decades while working with major museums in both Los Angeles and New York. How to Be Dead is her first novel. She lives with her writer husband in Santa Monica, California. Next life, Paris. Learn more at www.laurelschmidt.com. Laurel, take it away.
Hello. Hello. I am on? Yeah. Am I supposed to still be looking at you, Hala?
You're all
Yeah.
good. We can hear you and everything.
Okay, great. So How to Be Dead, yes, it's my first novel. It's a thrill. Working with Atmosphere has been just a fantastic experience. Really loved it. And so the main character in How to Be Dead, her name is Frances Beacon. And Frances was a social worker for 20 years in New York City, but she's enjoying a second career as a longevity guru. She has a blog, she has a best-selling book, and she has seminars that are packed to the rafters with adoring boomers who can not get enough of her. So she's feisty, she's funny, she's got a mouth on her. And she gives these seminars, they're like transfusions of energy to people. And so she says to her mantra, her mantra that she tells people is, you have to geyser up. And the main message that she's always giving to people is, live all you can. It's a mistake not to. And so that is her career. But at the moment we meet her at the beginning of the book, she is exhausted. She's exhausted and she's trying to struggle her way through rush hour crowds in Midtown Manhattan. And all she wants to do is get home. She wants to put her feet up, have a big glass of wine, and just relax. But she's stuck in Midtown. So she pulls her coat around her tighter and she presses on. She gets to the corner of 55th and Madison. There's a red light. She looks up, she stops, she leans on a mailbox because her knee is throbbing. And just as she stops, she smells salt. And there's the smell of ocean broth. And she closes her eyes and she remembers her lover. And she remembers being on the beach and then going home, making love, sleeping in his arms, and his beard still smelling like the ocean. An elbow jostled her out of her reverie. When she glanced up, she was looking south and she saw a green light, but instinctively she stepped off the curb heading west. And just like that, the game was over. Environmentally conscious vehicle 1, unconscious pedestrian, gone. But death certainly wasn't on her agenda, not even a remote possibility. After all, she was the best-selling author of Sex, Drugs, and Social Security, and she proudly declared that she'd lived to be 100. But 35 years had just been shaved off the longevity guru's life by a bright yellow New York City cab. So where was she? This long, bright hall could have been any number of places. A concourse in the subway, a transit tunnel between airport terminals, or the bowels of almost any building in Midtown. Just ahead, a cluster of people was looking expectantly in her direction. They probably read my blog or been to one of my seminars. She plastered on her best, "What a lovely surprise" expression and strode toward the group. "Hello there." Then she directed her trademark kudo, "You look fabulous," to the oldest person in the group. A woman with a riot of long gray curls thrust a dog-eared book toward her. "Can I have your autograph, please?" While a man in a blue denim shirt shouted, "Frances, love your blog. It saved my sanity more than once." She reached out and patted his shoulder. "Thanks. I'm never quite sure about it, but I'm glad it helped." Another woman pushed forward. "Frances, do you remember Louise from Des Moines? The lady who rescues dogs? Well, that's me." "Louise," she cried and delivered a robust hug, then held the woman at arm's length and gave an approving nod. "I'm so proud of you." She'd exchanged emails with this dog lover through a long and messy divorce, so this felt like a joyous reunion instead of a first encounter. She pulled a copy of her latest book out and scribbled her cell number inside. "Keep in touch, Louise." Out of the corner of her eye, she glimpsed a hand clutching a small green sign with Frances Beacon printed on it, like a driver waiting in the arrivals lounge of the airport. But the face was lost in the crowd. He'll have to be more aggressive than that if he wants to get my attention. The sign on the far wall pointed to the restrooms, so Frances blew a kiss to her little tribe and sprinted the last few yards. When she pushed open the door, she was relieved to discover that it was a one-seater, plain but private. Perfect. She shot the bolt in the lock and collapsed on the toilet before noticing that the back of the door was covered with graffiti, top to bottom, side to side. Why, she wondered, would anyone prolong her occupancy in a cubicle the size of a phone booth to share her thoughts with the squatting world? Normally, she'd just avert her eyes and get on with business. The hopscotch required to avoid puddles, maintaining minimum surface contact, and religiously shunning the fluorescent lit reflection of her face that made her pores look as big as pennies. But something caught her eye, a small heart surrounding two black letters, FB, and a plus sign. Below was a gray smear like a swath of fog where something had been erased. "Coincidence," she mumbled. "I've got more important things on my mind, like where am I and how the hell did I get here?" But her gaze had a mind of its own, deftly scanning the massive graffiti as if studying the Rosetta Stone. Several phrases leapt out. "The universe will rearrange itself to suit your expectations. See with your heart, not with your eyes. And live every day like it was your last." "How about this one?" Frances asked the empty room. "Avoid bathroom oracles." Then she sat very still as the room began to spin around her. She clamped both hands on her cheeks, trying to steady herself as she methodically reviewed her repertoire of skills for challenging situations. Breathe. Breathe. Slowly, she began to tap the bony ridge above her nose with her index finger, then her cheekbone, and then her chin, as she said the comforting chant, "Even though I have this feeling, I deeply and completely accept myself." Next, a few power gestures. She stood up and straightened her shoulders, head up, heart open. "You can handle this. You know you can." She closed her eyes and thrust her arms up in a wide V, like the top of an hourglass, and she visualized energy flowing down into her body. Finally, her go-to mantra, said as often in exasperation as joy, "I love my life. I love my life." As her arms fell, her right hand grazed something rough and tweedish, prompting a startled cry. A rumpled figure, like a large pile of laundry with a face, had materialized out of nowhere. "Oh, Jesus," she whispered. Then she froze, waiting for something to happen and fearing the worst. But all she heard was a faint chuckle from somewhere amongst a tumble of curls. Laughter wasn't a good sign, probably some kind of psychosis going on. And the smallest move, the wrong word, could trigger an escalation to violence. But hey, she was a New Yorker, where they had more muggers and lunatics per square block than any other city in the country. So by definition, self-defense was in her DNA. But her pulse was pounding in her head like a boombox, making it impossible to concentrate. "Think, Frances, think." The best strategy she could conjure up on short notice was borrowed from the dog whisperer. Never show fear. Act like this thing happens all the time. She tried to aim for a casual tone, but her voice was strained and thin when it finally emerged. I think one of us has the wrong room." No response. The aerosol apparition propped himself against the edge of the sink, then fumbled for a cigarette and took a long drag. Struggling to block another surge of fear, Frances swiveled her head, millimeter at a time, toward the door, measuring the distance between herself and the exit. Then she factored in the size of her opponent. It would be a close call, and who knows what she'd face outside, even if she managed to escape. He followed her glance, then eased over to slouch against the door where his body filled the whole frame. "Okay," she thought, "now this is definitely a hostage situation." But what were the rules? She'd had some crisis training years ago, but all she could remember was something about use his name and try to establish rapport. So she decided to give it a whirl. "I was just wondering, Mr. I assume you're a man." He reached for his crotch. "Stop, I'll take that as a yes." "Grayson," he drawled and took another long drag. "Well, no, mister," he interrupted, "just Grayson." He exhaled and Frances began to cough. "So what is it you do, Grayson?" She used her best cocktail party voice. He reached in his pocket and pulled out the green sign with her name on it. "I'm your transitional trauma specialist, grade 3. Her next move was stupid, and she regretted it the minute the words were out of her mouth. Too many syllables. "What?" He looked puzzled or worse, but she blundered on. "Your title, too many syllables, and I don't know, bureaucratic?" She cringed as she heard her mother's voice spilling from her mouth like a bad smell. "You need something snappier, easier to remember." "Never been a problem before." "Fine, I'm just saying." Her voice trailed off. "So, multi-syllable man, what do you do besides hang around the ladies' room?" "I told you, I'm a shock jock. I handle the high-profile cases, part guide, part counselor, compassionate probation officer, with a little concierge thrown in for good measure. Grayson, madam, at your service." "Great." For a split second, she relaxed, convinced that this had all been a big mix-up. "In that case, Grayson, I'd like an obscenely large glass of white wine, and pronto. It's been a hell of a day. I know, he said. I died once. She staggered back as if she'd taken a fist to the gut. Dead? No, 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 no. Her words sprayed the room like a machine gun fire, and she gave a little chuckle and scanned the walls for hidden cameras and microphones. Is this a reality show? Because I'm telling you right now. She waved a finger back and forth in front of his face. You got the wrong girl. I won't sign a release. You can't use this footage. She pulled out her phone, thrust it before him, tapping the screen. See this? I have a dinner reservation, so can we just get on with whatever this is? Probably some random act of urban misfortune. I just have to play along, she thought. Even if I'm in serious trouble. There's no way I'm. Now his lips were moving, but it was like watching TV with the volume off as the word dead rumbled through her head like thunder. He jerked his thumb toward the door. Let's blow this joint. When Frances tried to stand, her knees were jelly. She wasn't just sweating. Her armpits felt like they'd been power washed. The loss of composure was complete. I have to get out of here, she thought. I need to go home. So she screwed up her courage and snatched a quick glance in the mirror. Dead? Impossible. It is the end of chapter 1, and off she goes into the afterlife.
Thank you so much, Laurel. Frances is such a character. You can practically feel her in the room. So thank you to all three of you for reading tonight. And now we've got time. We've got about 10 to 15 minutes for our audience Q&A. So if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat and I will make sure it gets asked. So I'll give people a couple moments just to be typing. I do have a question to kind of start us off for Ekta. So you mentioned in the beginning of this event that this, publishing a book has been a dream of yours, ever since you were a teenager. So I was just curious, was the Truth About Elves the book you had always envisioned writing, or how did that idea come about?
Well, I mean, kind of a multi-step question. It's definitely not the story that I thought I would debut with, but I wrote it a few years ago, and I was entering it into story contests for really long stories because it's a novella, so it clocks in at just under 29,000 words. And I was sending it off, and it wasn't getting any traction, and so I actually considered just letting it live on my hard drive. But the main character, Curtis, who is the elf in the story who we meet and whose story we follow, he wouldn't leave me alone. And so I thought, maybe I should just go for broke. And while I'm working on other things, see what might happen if I submit this for consideration. So on January 1st this year, I sent it to Nick Courtwright, who is the head of Atmosphere. And I said, we'll see what happens. And, I heard back from him 2 months later with the acceptance, which of course I was thrilled. And I'm just really happy that people get to read this story. It's a holiday story, so it does have a happy ending, but Curtis, who is our main character, has been through a really tough time. And so he has to work through some of that before he can get to that happy ending. A lot of readers have said they thought it was the perfect stocking stuffer because it's thin. So it's something you can easily read in a single day. And, I had an event at our local bookstore here on Saturday night, and someone had bought 5 copies so that they could give them as Christmas gifts. And I've actually had that happen a couple of times. People mentioned they would give it as a gift. So it's definitely not the story that I envisioned would be my debut, but I'm so thrilled that it is. And it kind of helped me cut my teeth, I think, in the whole publication process, so that now, I can work towards bigger, more ambitious projects.
Yeah, that's awesome. It looks like we've kind of got some questions rolling in. So this is a question for everyone. or all three of you. From Melissa, she'd like to know if you could all share an aspect of your life that's reflected in your book, or alternatively, what inspired your book. So maybe Pasquale, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. So Duskborn Radiance is, on the surface, it's high fantasy, but the story is many layered, and it's inspired first and foremost by real world experience. And at its deepest levels, I would say it's about the magic that exists within each and every one of us, the universal truths that we live by, and really the human spirit, really, that unites us all. And in my travels, I have seen and experienced things that I really still don't have the words to describe in kind of real world terms, so I mythologize them. Beyond that, my experience in politics and then afterwards in the law also informs a lot of my writing as well. The things that I saw while working in politics, then later working in the court system and the like. So that's in there too, but really at the deepest levels, it's about magic, the magic that we all have. And it comes from my life, from experience in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Laurel or Ekta, did you want to chime in?
I'll take a shot at it. My mom was 92, and I remember looking at her and thinking, God, I wonder when I'm 92, will I, still be drinking coffee and, chatting with people and doing all the things, reading books, going to the library that she was doing. And then one day I realized that I was making an assumption, which is the assumption was that I'd live to be 92. And then the question sneaked into my mind, but what if you don't? And so the character of Frances, obviously, she thinks she's going to live to be 100. Doesn't happen. And the whole idea, what was very fascinating about the book is the idea came into my head complete. The title of the book, the situation of the character, and the sort of the premise, it just like landed in my head like a meteor. And I had a paper and pencil nearby and I scribbled it down. But what the book turns out to be for me, for the author, is a processing of the things we assume about life, the mistakes we make. And if we had to look back on our life and learn again and try it again, what would we do and how would we think about it? And so that even at the end of a life, there are things that we haven't mastered. And so the fantasy of the afterlife for Frances is that she still has to deal with the person she was in order to become someone else. And so it's a lot of my own personal, neuroses and mistakes and epiphanies played out through the afterlife with Frances.
Laurel, I can definitely identify with that aspect of the story sort of falling right into your head, because that sort of happened with me with this book. I was watching the Polar Express many, many years ago with my kids. And, there's several scenes, obviously, on the train and with the elves. And I started thinking about just elves in general and what would happen if they started flying with Santa. We always have this idea of Santa being the one to fly on Christmas Eve around the world. And I thought, what if an elf were to fly with him? And then the next question was, well, what if an elf were afraid to fly? Which followed with, well, what would make him afraid to fly in the first place? And, I started sort of challenging this general notion that we have that Santa flies in a sleigh. And I was like, what if he flies in a plane instead? And I started doing a little bit of research and Curtis's story, exactly what you said, fell into my brain pretty much fully formed. And the more research I did about planes and accidents, and sort of from my own memories of growing up with the pop culture references we have for Christmas and Santa and that sort of thing, it all just sort of came together. And it was more like he was telling me his story rather than me creating it. It was definitely informed along the way, like I said, by some of my own experiences. And I think in terms of my own personal connection to the book, you know, one of the things that Curtis really wants is he just really wants to come home again. And I think we've all had those times in our lives when we've been in a difficult place where we feel like we're all alone, and we feel like there's nobody could possibly understand what we're going through, and what we really want is to go back home, whatever home means. But specifically to that place where we feel safe and warm and fully accepted for who we are. And that's what he wants. He feels like he can't get that at the beginning of the book because of certain events that have occurred. But as I said, it is a happy ending. So I am happy that he does get that in the end, but it takes a little bit of work to get there. And I think also just reaching out to people who have a hard time during the holidays. You know, it's always difficult when we lose loved ones, but I feel like losing somebody who's close to you, especially at this time of year, brings its own pain. And maybe, you know, if somebody reads this and feels a little bit better about that, I feel like I would have accomplished something. In addition to just being published, but I would have accomplished helping someone. That's kind of my take on it all.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And then we have a question again for all three of you from Claire. She'd like to know, what was the hardest part of writing your book, and how did you overcome that?
I can start because for me, honestly, it wasn't that hard. As I said, when I started writing, it was almost like all of the images and everything sort of fell right into place. It was actually a lot of fun doing the research on you know, the different aspects, what conditions are like at the Arctic at different times of the year, you know, and research into planes and how they function. And like I said, specific accidents. There's an accident that happens in the book that actually is replicated pretty much close to what happened in real life. So that was really interesting to find out and kind of consider what the pilot went through. I didn't really have a hard time writing this one. So I guess, you know, for me, it wasn't too terrible. It was purely a joyous experience from start.
Pasquale, did you want to sort of comment on that as well?
Yeah, sure. The hardest part of writing the book, you know, really the hardest part was everything that came beforehand. You know, even when the words just kind of flow out and the characters write themselves and all of that, it takes an immense amount of faith in yourself, and belief in yourself and in the story that you want to tell, to sit down and put it down on paper. And that applies to every single story and every author. And I think that was the hardest part, was really learning how to trust myself and have faith in myself and in the story I wanted to tell. That was difficult for me, and it took some years before I really got serious about it. But then once I did, I enjoyed it so very. I hope it came across. Like, I love my characters, you know, they're more real to me than any of you are. And so I love them so much, and I love writing them. So like at that point, yeah, it's easy because I want to know what they're gonna do next. But yeah, everything that comes up to that point, that was all pretty difficult. A lot of lonely, boozy nights, I'll put it that way.
Well, I'll drink to that. So I'll tell you what was hard about my book. I agree with Ekta and Pasquale. When you're actually in it and you've met your characters and they reveal themselves to you, it's the most amazing, magical, joyful experience to sit down in the morning and find out what are they going to do and what's going to happen. And you don't know from morning to afternoon what the book is going to be like. It's a gift. It's just a gift to somebody to get a story that takes you like that takes you over. But there were two things I think that were hard about, I can say about my book. One is just the craft part, which is structure. The book is long and there are many, many characters, 15, 16, 20 characters in the story. And to structure it in such a way that the stories interlinked and made sense and it flowed, and then the arc of Frances's growth and interweaving that with the other characters, that I studied that a lot. I studied story structure a lot. I read a lot of different theories about it and tried to find some ideas that could really help me, but it took time. And sometimes I'd have pieces of story and not know where the hell they were going to go. So that was the technical craft part. The other part, some of this book was very emotional, and it was very much a process of revelation, which was really about revealing myself through the character. There were things in that story that I wrote that were very difficult. Things about how I felt about my mother, things about when my father died, and things about Frances, my own, mistakes and deficiencies. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to be honest. I am just going to tell it. I'm going to tell what happened. And if it's funny or if it's sad or whatever it is, I'm going to bare my soul. And I remember a woman gave somebody advice at a story conference, and she said, if you really, really want to write and you want to get that stuff out there, she said, just write like you're an orphan. So I couldn't think about the fact that my brother or my sisters or people in my family would read it, or that friends would read it and say, geez, I didn't know you had to take dumbbell English. I didn't know you did this. I didn't know you didn't speak to your mother for a year. But I thought, I don't care. I'm going to tell the truth, because it all is Frances's story, as it is all my story. And it is part of the progress of a soul. It's the progress of a human being developing. And ultimately, in Frances's case, it's the progress of a soul over many lifetimes. So that was what was hard, but worth it, totally worth it.
I love that. Yeah, I think, a lot of people kind of underestimate that the process of that painful part of the process when you're a writer, but you put it in words so eloquently. We have one last question for the night. This is from Rohan, and he says, I was thinking about the saying, don't judge a book by the cover, and thought to myself, don't judge an artist by the book. So I'm curious how you guys chose the cover art and who the artist was. So if any of you wanted to comment on that, the cover art process.
Yeah, Kevin Stone designed my cover. He is a genius. I will forever be indebted to him, because this will be my most favorite cover. I'm sure, going forward, if I'm fortunate enough to have other books published, and hopefully by Atmosphere, that other amazing covers will come along the way. But you know what they say, you never forget your first, right? So, and this is my first, and I will never, ever forget it. And so the process for me, at least, was when I first signed on with Atmosphere, and we were kind of very, very early on. I got an email from Ronaldo, who is art director, asking me for information on the book, some of my impressions about the book, and some comparable titles, or comps as we call them, and what I thought would where I thought the book would fit kind of on a virtual bookshelf or in a real life bookshelf. Based on that, he communicated all of that information to Kevin, and Kevin came up with several mock-ups. I think there was a total of 12 covers 6 actual covers with different variations. So each one had 2 variations. And when I saw this one, something about it just drew my eye. I mean, the Aurora Borealis, of course, up in the Arctic, you know, it's still something that amazes me. I've never seen it in real life. I've seen pictures, I've seen video. I've never seen it in real life. I would love to be able to go and see it sometime in real life. It's always fascinated me. And there's, you know, a brief scene in the book where Curtis is looking at it and sort of thinking about where he is, what he's doing. And Kevin just captured that so beautifully. And I think the quote that I have on my website from him is that he sort of wanted to capture that essence, that magic of Christmas, but also give it just a touch of being a little bit forlorn and sort of being a little bit alone in the world, which is how Curtis feels early on in the book. And I think he captured that beautifully. So all of the credit goes to him and to Atmosphere for having such an amazing designer on staff. And yeah, I just, I love this cover, and you know, so thrilled that it's on a very book.
Yeah, he did a great job. So
You know, Kevin did mine too. As it's a series, there's a unifying theme, and I had very specific ideas of what it should look like. And for this one, just I don't know if you can, you know, the Druidic tree of life, which really represents more than we can get into right now, was what I wanted to invoke. It goes to what that represents, really speaks to a lot of the themes in the book and specifically in this volume. And that's really what I wanted was the you know, the series title in the branches, the volume title in the roofs, the two taking up the same amount of space. He was the one who was like, all right, let's set this against a starry night sky and all of that. And I said, whoa. So when I saw the final product, I was so happy about it. But yeah, that's what I wanted to invoke, was the tree of life for this volume.
And Laurel, any similar, different, related thoughts?
Well, it's just, you know, it's the title really is everything in this case, because it's How to Be Dead. And then it's the subtitle, A Love Story. So it was really just the words. And I just wanted it to look kind of like frantic and hasty, like something you would scrawl on a Post-it note and hand to someone. And I adore red. It's just so when we got the scrawl right and then laid it on red, I was thrilled with it. I was just thrilled. So it's a very collaborative process. I think everybody's indicated that. It's a very collaborative process. It's fascinating. If you're interested in design, it's fun because you can look at all different kinds of things and say, that's the one. So that's the one.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm just noticing now all 3 of you have such different covers too. So it's really cool to hear all 3 of your thoughts about that. But with all of that being said, it was so, I just want to say it was so great to hear all 3 of you read and to hear you talk about your writing processes and just the process of the whole, you know, book journey. So thank you so much to Ekta, Pasquale, and Laurel for your brains and your words and your generosity with your time tonight. And thank you to everyone. Yeah, of course. And thank you to everyone for being here with us to, you know, celebrate these fabulous fantasy or fantasy adjacent authors. So don't forget that you can order The Truth About Elves, Duskborn, Radiance, and How to Be Dead from the links in the chat. And please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, to sign up for our email newsletter, or to submit a book manuscript of your own. Feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended today's event. We look forward to hearing from you. And that's it. Have a safe and wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great.